Welcome everybody to another episode of our influential games series, where for this one we're going to be discussing famous genres and some of the major games and designs that kind of made up with it. For our panel this time, we're going to be discussing car combat or the evolution of using vehicles and combat in your game. So, as always, I'll give our panel a chance to introduce themselves, and unfortunately, we are missing Seth this week, so there should be some lovely either images or cars moving around down below me. But we'll start to my right with Josh, and then go down to Tomo. So, feel free, guys.
Hi, my name is Josh Reyes, and I'm from Casual Game Studio. Currently, we're working on Samurai Pig, and I'm excited to talk about car combat. One of my favorite genres when I was a kid, I believed that it was going to be like this massive futuristic genre, but it just ended up being kind of niche. So, but anyway, ready to go. So, how are we doing, Tomo?
Good. My name is Tomo Moriwaki. I've been a game designer for a very long time. I'm one of the founders of a small studio called Hyperkinetic Studios, and we have one game on Steam Early Access called Epic Tavern, all about disassembling storytelling.
Mm-hmm. But I only going to be like driving around hitting people in Epic Tavern, right?
No, but you know,
what engine are you using?
For us, it's just Unity.
Oh, it's just Unity. Yeah, there's a checkbox now that you can just add that. You can just add the.
Do you have to do anything extra for drifting, by the way? Is that like a bonus feature?
Yeah.
Well, funny bit of trivia of ancient history in video games. When I was working on Die by the Sword at Treyarch, that's when Carmageddon came out.
Oh, yes. Carmageddon was 1997.
Yeah, and I think Carmageddon was the first game I saw with a swear pack. And Interplay was our publisher as well, so we made a swear pack for Die by the Sword. And the swear pack for Die by the Sword was actually fantastic because it went from everyone, talking with Scottish accents to saying the F word constantly.
I guess I'm going to have to add a swear pack for Samurai Pig now.
There you go.
That sounds like it could work.
Alright, so as we were talking about, our topic for this episode is all about car combat. And this is one of those genres that really has seen like a very interesting turn. Like when we get to the subject of RPGs and how everything is an RPG, and for that one we will have to break them into multiple episodes, so we'll be here for like 8 to 10 hours easily.
Lots of added content.
Yeah, but car-based games or car combat focus is a very interesting kind of, in a way, kind of feels like a relic of some of the older aspects of design. And that will certainly make itself more apparent as we start discussing some of the major names. So, for me, when I think about car combat or kind of like my first taste of it, I go to stuff like Mario Kart, Twisted Metal, and F-Zero. But there were games before that. So since I am not the guy who knows too much about it, I will throw it over to you two. So, what was kind of like the origin, or like some the very early examples?
I remember in your channels, Seth talking about a game that I actually really loved, and I played so many hours of when I was, I think it was middle of high school. It was called Road War 2000 by SSI.
Yes.
And granted, I actually didn't like the game for its car combat. Although there was car combat, it was sort of turn-based, kind of grid-based on what looked like a highway. But the game was this great sort of like a post-apocalyptic gang accumulation game, and then you wander, the ruined wreckage of the United States I don't even know what the story was. I can't quite remember, but I do remember enjoying it a lot. So that's a long time ago. But Auto Duel for the Apple 2, I think 2 plus maybe, I think predates it by a year.
Yeah, and pretty much the same for me. Like I would say, Mario Kart and Twisted Metal are definitely the main ones and the mains that really define the genre. And if we're going back older, we can even go back to Spy Hunter, things like Road Blasters, and or even rock and roll racing and things like that. Those ones are definitely ones that stick out to me. Games like Carmageddon and Vigilante 8 felt a little almost try hard to there, but they're ones that stick out in that one. But those are the ones that stick, that I remember.
Mm-hmm. I was just about to mention Spy Hunter too. It just like popped
Spy
in my
Hunter,
head.
yeah. Yeah, and I was, as I was doing research for this, I was looking over and I was realizing, I was like, the genre in my head, rose tinted, seemed so much larger than it actually was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, Spy Hunter is sort of alone in that space.
Yeah,
and then Twisted Metal. I mean, in hindsight, it came out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And clearly, Carmageddon exists because of Twisted Metal, though.
Because of Twisted Metal, and Vigilante 8 exists because of Twisted Metal, and most other games were just basically based off of Twisted Metal's ideas. And Carmageddon was just like as much carnage as possible, like right.
And running over people. There's so much running over people.
So much running over. I had trouble with that. Like,
wasn't there
I didn't enjoy this, I don't think.
Wasn't there a classic arcade game from the 80s that was controversial for running over people? Can't remember the name of it.
Also, Road Rash. Would Road Rash be considered? Yeah, Road Rash also. That one sticks out. It's not really car combat, but motorcycle combat.
Mm-hmm.
Vehicular.
And Road Rash definitely is the precursor to that. I keep forgetting the name. I never played the game, but my friend was talking about it and loved it. You were just talking about it earlier, the one that has like the indie resurgence game.
Road Redemption.
Road Redemption, and Road Rash was the game that came before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And those, I mean, I feel like people that like those games really like them a lot. Put a good amount of time into them.
Yeah.
Interstate 76. Interstate 76 is
yes.
like a bright point in the distant history, right? Right before Activision became today's Activision.
Oh boy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what you just said there, Tom, was a really good point, that it's not a huge genre, but it's one of those genres that really has adopted a very fervent fan base of people wanting to see more of those kinds of games. I know if a Pony is watching this recording right now, we just mentioned F-Zero, and he'll show up to look at that. And
after he watches it, he'll be dreaming about F-Zero all night.
Mm-hmm.
And I do too. I still do dream about F-Zero. I dream about, hoping that there'll be a new Twisted Metal that's amazing and or something new. But I just feel like the genre constraints kind of hold it back as how it stayed niche. Do you agree, guys?
Well, it partly it's because it's hard to make a good version of that game on too small a budget, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of sort of heavy lifting development that needs to happen to kind of get the base level of those kinds of games together. And since it was kind of a small genre, I don't think there's a lot of devs that think about it.
Exactly. And Tomo, have you ever tried to develop any vehicular stuff?
Yes. In fact, we had on Medal of Honor in 2010. And that's the thing is, if you have a big solid EA team, I mean, you can definitely do all those things.
You can do that, yeah. You can do that.
We collaborated with, I think, the Need for Speed team.
Oh, geez.
They sent us a bunch of stuff, and they built a chunk of city. And one of our levels was driving, I think they were SUVs. I kind of don't entirely remember just because my brain just didn't even understand that's what could even be possible. They're like, wait, the Need for Speed team is doing one of our levels now?
Right.
And you're going to drive around? And so we also had ATVs and did a lot of the physics stuff for making that feel right.
Oh,
but no, and it was just okay. And it was a crap load of work.
Yeah.
So the game should be all about it so that you can really do it justice.
But as I've done it as indie, and I've done teams like before, and as you said, heavy lifting, just getting the vehicle to even, like, I don't know if you've ever like you played GTA and you're like, man, why doesn't the game, like the car control just right? It's kind of off or whatever. It's because it's so difficult to get right. It's just so difficult to get right. We've spent months and months and months trying to, before we scrap the prototype, trying to get the vehicle to feel okay. And so, like, you were totally like blessed getting Need for Speed help work with you,
and even so, it was still like we had coders who were very, very smart. They knew exactly what needed to happen, and it was still a couple weeks of conversation about like rigid body physics and how to approach our simulation. How much of it do we fake? How much do we do for real? And how we have to build stuff, and the kind of conversations about the shock absorbers and stuff. And I'm like,
exactly.
Are you sure we want to do this?
Right. And then not only that, has to be different, right? You're going to have like a big giant ice cream truck, and that has to be different. And then maybe a smaller car, smaller race car. And each one is going to have different physics and different shock absorbers and different stuff. And then getting it all. Yeah. Are you sure you want to do that? Right. And then you get into the part about what are their abilities? How are we going to shoot? How are we going to drive and shoot at the same time? And I think getting all those things together makes it really difficult, right? And like you said, you have to have a massive team. And even then, when you have a massive team, and like you said, and they know what everything that they're doing, it's still just huge. Yeah.
I really enjoy playing World of Tanks. And I wouldn't, it's not necessarily car combat, but it wouldn't have existed without there being car combat games before. Right. And it is one of the most complicated games that's an action game that I can think of. There's basically, like hundreds of tanks, and each of those tanks has like a very specific kind of like shape to their armor, the angle of the armor, the thickness of the armor, and then all the guns have different amounts of penetration and different amounts of range, the speed and movement, the accuracy of the guns depending on movement or turret rotation or whatever. And so just playing the game is actually kind of a little bit too complicated. You're like, oh, I haven't played for a year, and they're like 20 new vehicles, and
that's why
I just look at them and I have no idea what to do. I just I move my cursor around them while they kill me. Oh, I can shoot that spot.
Oh yeah. Oh, I get to date myself with this one. It's me about combining driving and cars. Who here, including people watching this recorded, played the arcade game Tango and Cash, which was a driving first-person shooter. So you could play like two people, one person driving, one guy using the gun, or you play one person, you're trying to drive, steer the wheel, and shoot like Dirty Harry.
That was so cool. I did play that. It was really cool when you went with a friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was just a crazy one to try and do.
Oh, what an interesting game. Nice. I guess it was called Lucky and Wild before Tango and Cash, and then they branded it.
Yeah.
But it's probably only Lucky and Wild in Japan. Like, oh, we can take this game and brand it to Tango and Cash and then bring it to America. That's so funny. Tango and Cash, that definitely dates well, it dates me too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although we were saying how like not a lot of developers are thinking about these kinds of games. I wonder if David Jaffe is thinking about these kinds of games.
See, I was trying to get I know a dev who's working, and he's like an indie dev working on one, and David Jaffe actually noticed his game that he was working on. He's working on like a Twisted Metal type game, and he was working on it solo. So I was trying to get him on here, but we couldn't, and because he's one of the few devs that I know that is actually currently working on it.
Nice.
So. But and it looks great. I mean, if it caught David Jaffe's attention,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
well, I mean, he's kind of the undisputed father of all these games in this regard, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And to go back to kind of discussing like the difficulty of these games, that's another really hard aspect of these kinds of designs, because do you make, as you said, do you make it more like arcadey? Do you go for like Gran Turismo level of simulation and realism? And it is one of those things that you can have like so many different takes on it. And like when I think of the ones that I generally enjoyed, like they were not realistic at all. You know,
Yeah, I don't think you can get too realistic with the driving, honestly, because you have to it's not that you have to sacrifice one quality for another, and that you have to sacrifice position and speed for the shooting, right? Because that's the business end of that experience. And so you'll need to, like, the moving around and the controls of moving around and the difficulty of moving around has to serve, and like in a controlled way, what it's like to hit something. So you can't just willy-nilly make those movement controls, even if, if your goal is to make them very realistic or any particular thing. If it's not sort of directly in service of making that shooter experience better, it'll probably be an impediment.
Yeah, well said.
Mm-hmm. So with like some of like the older examples, like when we look, like, do you consider stuff like Road Rash, Mario Kart? Do you consider that to be in like the same wheelhouse as games like Twisted Metal? Like games like Twisted Metal, like if I remember right, they were more just like arenas with cars.
Yeah.
While stuff like Road Rash, Mario, F-Zero is you're driving, but you just so happen you can hit people, throw shells, and so on.
And I think we can probably take steps towards, like, on one end, pure arena combat. There's a space. You move around and you fight each other, right? All the way to this other end where it's not a fight, but you can fight if you want to, right? Mario Kart is a race game that happens to have ways where you can hurt each other. And there's lots of games in that genre because, there's probably a bigger market for racing that you can then spin with combat than there is for just the car combat itself. Or if you take the racing away, basically, you lose some number of fans somehow.
Exactly. Also, Mario Kart did feature, it did have an arena-based mode that you could play. And so I spent just so much time playing that. It was actually my favorite mode, was playing the arena-based game, but you had to have, because it was couch co-op, so you had to have people with you to play it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so we had that. So I would play that constantly, and it was really based really well because it allowed the combat, like the turtle shells and all that stuff, to be expanded and changed in a different way with the arena, and it worked really well because when you're racing, you're just going straight, but allowing to curve and go around and use the movements worked really well with and in the arena combat for Mario Kart. So if anybody hasn't tried that out, it's definitely it's a good template to look at.
Well, it's like, I think there's probably room right this moment for there to be the Fall Guys version of Mario Kart, right?
Definitely.
Like, I think a lot of people would dig that, and that level of complexity in the movement, it's the right, like that's a safe starting point, right? There'll be plenty of people that can handle it, plenty of people that'll like it, and then it's hilarious to beat each other. Actually, you know what? Not Fall Guys. Smash Brothers meets Mario Kart. That's probably what you really want to do.
And Rocket League, or like something like that.
Yeah, I was just about to mention Rocket League too. Like that's kind of like where we saw like car-based games kind of go into more of, I guess, like not so much fighting, but more like competing. I know like Trackmania is a very popular series, but I don't think there's any combat in that one. I think that's just driving, right?
Yeah, just driving.
Remember Halo Forge? And they would have some of those, like I want to call it a Sparrow, but I think that's what they call it in Destiny. But they also have like Warthog and whatever. They're hover bike battles. There was some really interesting stuff that was made there, like Capture the Flag or it's not hard. It's a long time ago to remember, but there was a lot of good stuff that got built out of those tools.
And I was looking it up. Here's another game. I'm curious if anyone here played or people watching this recorded. There's a game called Renegade Ops that came out in 2011. This was top-down. This was kind of like a top-down action-adventure game, but with cars. So it's kind of like playing like the same style as like the original GTA. but you had like super weapons. You were fighting bad guys. It was from Avalanche again, who went on to do Mad Max.
Oh no, I missed that one. That
I
sounds
totally
great.
played this game. This is the game I was talking about, which was like it's like the Strike series, but you're on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
This is a fun game.
Yeah.
What's the name?
Renegade Ops.
Renegade Ops.
And what console launch was it a part of? Let's see here.
Well, it came out in
PS3
2011
and 360.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I guess it's an interesting touch. Like when we looked at some people, as you were saying like earlier about some of like the limitations of the genre. I'm pretty sure there was a game about riding dragons, and this was a PlayStation 4 launch or PlayStation 3 launch that it was pretty much dead on arrival. That was kind of a combat game with dragons.
I think I remember what you're talking about, and I think that's why I don't remember anything about it. And instead, Panzer Dragoon just like gets in the way of the camera.
Oh yes.
But Panzer Dragoon, of course, is more like a rail shooter.
Yeah, it's a rail shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Still an outstanding game. Although the idea of painting auto-targeting cursors onto targets as you're moving, many vehicular combat game has used that mechanic, which I think is a really good mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like combined with like a machine gun plus the guided missile targeter or whatever. Maybe a little bit more for mechs.
Here it is. I think I found the one I was thinking of, Lair, which was a PlayStation 3 launch title.
That was their launch title, right? Yeah.
And it just...
That one did terribly.
And I guess, like, as a bit of a question for the group, do you think that the whole appeal is, like, the driving aspect? Or do you think, like, just, like, controlling a vehicle and fighting and war? Because, again, like, when we think of, like, the major names, it's always about car, motorcycle, like, realistic or, I guess, loosely realistic vehicles fighting each other.
I mean, I think you can make it work on a dragon, but it's tricky. If I remember, I only played this game for about 3 or 4 minutes at the office.
Later.
And yeah, and the biggest problem was just that it didn't control well. That I think, God, I'm like pulling back such distant memories, but like I feel like there were a lot of products in that era that overlooked controls and instead focused on the visuals and the sound and some of the movements, sort of assuming that if they got those right, that it would then feel better. But there's literally no substitute from a control standpoint to making the controls feel good, and that's it's almost like its own sub-discipline, and it certainly doesn't mix well with other facets of the game. It's like it's its own thing, and it's like this weirdness, like I'm just like the kind of old Japanese games tradition that are like action responsive to controls. Those of you that Bayonetta 2 is better than Bayonetta 3 because of this. And that idea, if it's not really strong and present in the team, it's really hard to make a game where you have to it's really hard to make a game where it's going to be successful at an action level. But without those, it's really hard to kind of create, convince the controller user that they're navigating this other thing. And so if you make that feel good, it doesn't matter what it is. That's kind of a neat experience, because then I can connect to the movements and then fight. And if I can do that and it makes sense to my brain, then I can enjoy what's going on. And then all the other rules for just making a good game just fall into place. But you can't even get there, I guess, if you don't have the other stuff.
Yeah, regardless of aesthetics or whatever it is, it should feel good to control whatever you're playing. It should be like if it could be a box, a spear, regardless, that doesn't matter. But that needs to feel good first. And yeah, I think in that era, people, we were chasing, trying to push like graphical boundaries and further, and then hoping, like you said, that would attract people and they would like kind of get over the controls, and the controls don't really matter. But in the end of the day, gameplay and movement to movement feeling is way more important, and that's what keeps you going in the game. It's like you said, it could be a dragon, it could be a car, but it needs to feel good and control movement to movement. So
yeah, I mean, all my experience in Spider-Man resulted in, if we were going to make a game like that and we didn't have the right team, maybe it should be turn-based.
Yeah. When you were making Spider-Man and you had your prototype, were you using like a cube or something, or like a sphere first to?
No, we had just, it's big publishers, and so we had a full on. We had 26 people on the project when we were prototyping the swing. So we had a full on Spider-Man. Then the animations were being made every single day, all day.
And sweet.
By the time the fourth month was done, we probably had like hundreds of Spider-Man animations, and we were swapping them in and out and trying to figure things out constantly. I know departments don't like to always work like that when they're bigger teams, but we had been at the company all together for a while, so we were kind of like a mishmashed family.
Knew how to work together well. Yeah,
that was the only thing that made it possible, probably.
Yeah, it's real important, and we've talked about that before. Like. What did you say when Bungie wasn't Bungie anymore? You know what I mean? It's real important that when a studio needs to stay together and work together to learn, because then basically, like, you can talk you can talk without talking, and what you're going to do next, and that really helps produce a much better game than having disjointed people that are new, etc. Anyway, that's off point, but
well, I mean, it connects. I think it's something about what we're talking about, though, in the production process, and how like certain kinds of things need more departmental intersection. That almost certainly contributes to why there aren't a ton of these games that are good.
Yeah, true, very true.
But yeah, as you were saying, like in terms of the challenge of getting the physics and the feel right, it really heavily depends, again, on that market that you're shooting for. Because if you say racing or driving, do you mean Mario Kart? Do you mean a Crash Team Racing? Do you mean Gran Turismo? Or one of the interesting things is we were talking about like how like the genre kind of had like this like almost this like evolutionary wall that it hit, and where we didn't see it. A lot of indie developers have been making like car-based games or kind of like car-esque titles. Like there's the whole Mechanic Simulator franchise. There's that game Jalopy that came out like a few years ago. Like people describe as like the Dark Souls of like maintaining a car. There's one that I just, let me see if I can find the email, because it was just in the Latin American Game Showcase. And this was one that I played about, I want to say a year ago. Here it is. We Took That Trip, which is kind of like a walking simulator, but you're using like a very old like 1970s van, and you're trying to like drive around and keep it working and all that. So like that kind of approach has been like its own like weird like off branch of kind of car-based or car-driven games.
Oh yeah, what was the game where you're? You're driving a car like in Italy or something.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. I just can't remember the name of it. I may actually own it too. I think someone.
I do own it, but I couldn't find it easily in my 2,000 games on Steam.
I don't know what that's about either.
So funny.
Where is it? Someone watching this right now record is like screaming at the
screaming.
Yeah, they know exactly which game.
Oh, and
they're actually playing it right now.
Well, I mean, this game was kind of like I feel like an indie darling, like just before the pandemic.
And speaking about like driving and kind of like this kind of genre, what do you think of like the whole snow runner, mud runner? Like that's like super duper like physics and realistic based driving, where it's actually modeling like how the mud and the snow is interfering with your tires. And I spent like 30 minutes in Mud Runner. I couldn't even get like 20 feet ahead. Like nothing was working.
Yeah, well, those are, but that starts getting into sort of the mechanic simulator,
Yeah.
which evolved into the cleaning simulator.
Yeah.
And that's kind of crazy that like in hindsight you're like, oh, I get it. The gameplay is very similar, but that it was able to make that jump. By the way, like there's a game called like post World War II Rebuilder.
Yes, I saw
And it's
that.
just like this epic cleaning game where you're fixing a destroyed, Europe after World War II, and that's like the evolution of this like mechanic simulators, car simulators, agriculture simulators to house flipper to that.
I have Lawn Mowing Simulator 2022 edition. I could load up. There
the
you go.
Lawnmower Simulator.
There's the $1 million idea for our stream: car combat lawn mowing. You're playing with other people trying to mow the lawn in time.
Oh yeah, that's great.
And you've jacked up your John Deere's into death machines, right?
Your John Deere's, that's right.
Guy had that nitrous, the lawn mowing.
And it's got to be like Redneck Rampage with just gratuitous carnage when there are accidents and stuff.
just random chickens walking around.
Yeah. And exploding into little red bursts.
Oh man! But
accidentally run over the paper boy.
Oh jeez. But yeah, that actually brings up. Oh, now I'm really dating myself. The original Death Race, the movie that came out, was like in the 70s or 80s.
Death Race was in 76.
Oh god, I'm really dating myself.
Kung Fu.
Yeah.
And Spy Hunter was in 80. So wow.
Oof.
The Spy Hunter music.
Mm-hmm. And it is, again, like one of those very awkward genres in terms of, I guess, again, like why we really haven't seen like too many, and like the ones we have seen have always been, again, like inspired by some of these older games. Like, again, like going back to Road Rash. I know Pony was mentioning, I think there's a game called Carters, which is supposed to be like the indie, like Mario Kart style game. You know, there's that brief period where everyone got like really obsessed about that Garfield kart racing game. Like, it was another one people just kept playing. Like, was it like so bad that it's good or so good that it's bad? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I feel like I think that a big part of it is it was never able to find the genres were not able to find mainstream success except for Twisted Metal. But Twisted Metal just fit right into the other. Like, Twisted Metal was a great game back when there weren't like just 4 genres of games for consoles.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then after that, like Twisted Metal Black had a lot harder time gaining traction, even though it did fine. It was just like, oh, the audiences of that moment were like, what category does this fit into? And it doesn't fit into a good category for them anymore. I mean, an indie game can come out and be this, no problem, because those of us that enjoy indie games are used to a game that doesn't match the games that we played before, and so we're excited about it, right? But if this were to try to be like a giant, heavily promoted, launch console game, everyone would be like, oh, I don't understand why they made that choice.
Yeah, I'm really wondering what the future is of this genre. If like you said, Tomo, it seems like there's primed for someone to jump in the position, but I'm just wondering advancements and what changes could go forward or be added to this genre to make it really fit. Because I know there was a few live service games that tried with like car customization and car combat. I can't remember the name right now on PlayStation 4, and that one just sunk super quick. Yeah. So I'm just kind of wondering like what's in the future for this genre, because I do love this genre.
Well, I'm sure that there probably is one, right? Like sort of like a free to play, like car design game that probably does okay. Yeah, and that the people that are like they know they want it are playing that game and are sort of happy. But that's also kind of in the same genre of like customizing your mechs and fighting against other people who's customized mechs. And isn't there a game like that that's like sort of like You construct things like, like out of toys almost, and you fight them against each other. I've seen it. Does it have the word robo in it somehow?
Are you thinking of Mech Warrior or a different one?
No,
Ooh,
I'm
there's
talking
Mech
way
Warrior
more
2.
off the beaten path than Mech Warrior.
Because I think isn't there a free to play Mech Warrior also?
I think I heard mixed things about that one too.
Yeah, not very good.
Oh my god! Never search Steam with just ROBO.
Yes.
There's only 100 million results.
Or zombie.
Yeah.
And I guess for you, Josh, what did you think of Rocket League? Like, do you think that fits that same kind of car combat or like arena combat, or do you think it's too much of its own thing that's not really like the same part of this?
Yeah, I think it's just too much of its own thing to be a part of car combat. It's really, I mean, it's basically just soccer, right? It's just soccer with replacing it with a vehicle. So I don't feel like it fits in car combat at all.
Yeah, it's totally like a physics experiment more than
physics-
car combat.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I don't think it's anywhere close to that. Plus, I don't think it has any like there's no car customization. There's no abilities that you can use to attack. Right? There's literally no combat, right? If I'm recalling correctly in
Basically,
that game. Yeah. So.
Let me see. What was the other game we didn't mention yet? Oh yeah. One game, like as we were discussing about kind of like the other side is like the customization aspect. Like that goes in some very interesting places. So I know like EA with the Need for Speed series really tried to like push the RPG live service model into several of the Need for Speed games. What was it? I forget the one, not the one that just came out, but there was one previously that was like so like gotcha monetization driven. I know it annoyed a lot of people. Speaking of which, I can't believe we forgot Midnight Club, the one from Rockstar.
Yes, yeah,
Sure.
Midnight Club.
Yeah.
Yeah,
RoboCraft is the name of the game, by the way.
RoboCraft.
You are massive freedom to just build whatever, and you can fight with them.
That's one of the few Robo games I don't have.
It's free to play, so you probably saw it and you're like, I'll get it some other time.
Yeah, that's why.
Because I don't have time to get into that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Especially you look at the video and you're like, oh no, that's the type of game you put time into. It's like probably not quite as bad as like Space Engineers or something, but still kind of on that path.
Oh no, I do not have time for this game.
Oh, that reminds.
Well, I think if I did, I'd be happy.
Right. Be so great. I'd be playing some gratuitous MMO all day, and then head into RoboCraft later.
And that reminds me, we're talking about games where you can customize vehicles. I get to return to that hill I will die on. That I still love Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. I know that one a lot of people did not like. I love that game.
Literally never even touched it.
Yeah, that
Is it worth a try?
I only know of it. Yeah, I never played it, but
Yeah,
I thought it looked cool. I thought there was cool stuff.
It's good if you go into it not wanting to play a Banjo-Kazooie game, because it plays nothing like the previous ones.
I gathered that.
I think one of my favorite things was constructing a car/helicopter. So
Is it on
for
Steam?
no, unfortunately no. Maybe they'll bring it someday. I mean, Microsoft is like putting everything on these days, so who knows?
No,
But
I don't feel like putting it on the emulator right now.
But it was like one of those games where you can solve a puzzle by saying, "Oh, it's a game you're supposed to drive through the race." You know what? I'm just gonna make a low flying car plane, so I'll just fly over all the hoops and
nice.
Again, like it just counts me going through the rings. It doesn't count me actually being on the road. So let me just solve it like that.
Well, so there are a couple games, and I think it'd be really an interesting, first of all, GTA 2 could be seen as sort of a car combat game, and it was 2D and it was top down. But there are these two games which are very related to each other, which I find super fascinating, which I'd love if they turned into like vehicle combat games, which to some extent that RoboCraft game is probably very similar to, just more complicated in 3D. A game called Captain Forever and Reassembly. Neat thing about Reassembly is I learned about the game after meeting the one of the two devs at a game dev mixer in Los Angeles. Then checked out the game, was blown away, and then the next game dev mixer, I'm like, dude, your game's amazing. But very similar to Captain Forever, where it's like extremely modular but open-ended construction of vehicles. I mean, it's in space, so it's not really directly applied, but that sort of gameplay mechanic I love.
Yeah, it kind of
The kind of idea of Car Wars, but getting crazy.
Kind of sounds like what they were trying to do with Space Pirates and Zombies, with that kind of like just gonna put all the chunks together and that's your ship. Doesn't have to be symmetrical. It can be just like this like weird shape flying around with lasers coming off of it.
When you puzzle solve all of the content, right? You're just trying things out and learning things about the system. Things about the system probably the developer doesn't even entirely know. Although, man, do you guys remember a game called Chrome Hounds?
Yes, is that the one that was kind of like Steel Battalion?
It was like From Software's stab at creating a design your own mech combat game. It was multiplayer only, Xbox One launch, I think. Xbox without anything added to it launch. I hate them. And that game died because eventually there weren't players, and since it was multiplayer only, you couldn't play it. But it was a really interesting mech warrior-like game. In fact, honestly, if MechWarrior were to take that and build itself out of it, I think it would be better than it is today, even. And I like the MechWarrior game of today from, that got Kickstarted or whatever. That's a fun game.
Yeah. And like speaking about like the customization aspect, this was something that I wanted to bring up because again, as we were talking about this kind of like the evolution or where the genre could go, like I would love to see, like again, I'm dating myself again with this one, with like trying to do another take off of the Auto Assault formula, which this was one of Cryptic Studios who made a City of Heroes, one of their little experiments in the MMO. That was, again, the one where it was basically an MMO, but instead of a character, you had a car. So, leveling up meant going and beating enemies and trying to craft a new engine, or get better steering and stuff like that. And but I think the problem with that is that it gets back at that heart we were talking about earlier, the feel. Like, how do you make a level 1 car feel bad enough to drive that you want to level it up, but not so bad enough that someone just doesn't go, oh my god, this whole thing feels horrible, I never want to play this game again.
Yeah, that's
a huge problem. Yeah, because that problem is totally present in World of Tanks, which is one of the more successful vehicular combat games, and if people don't like that, they don't play.
I mean, that's even just like an MMOs thing, like bashing rats over the head for 10 levels fun, that's something hard to
Yeah. Well, I feel like if you get the mechanics feeling good, then it's okay at the beginning. Yeah. I mean, granted, you can make some bad choices about how you start versus what the middle is and what the end is, but you could, there are a lot of approaches, and it's also worth noting that Twisted Metal never changes, right?
Right. You just have an excellent controlling vehicle. Well, for its time, I think for what it does, and then it doesn't change, right? You have your same attacks, and so that it keeps it simple, and also keeps the balance easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in fact, it's probably worth mentioning, right, that the core of the genre is that the action is good. Kind of a game like Star Control, but for vehicles on the ground. And 3D maybe more frequently than 2D, at least if we look back at the history books. And so that's the base game. Adding progression is, something if you wanted to maintain that genre, you'd have to do it carefully because you can't mess up the base experience.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about like having that really great experience, one thing we were talking about before we started the recording was, of course, Mad Max from Avalanche, the guys, again, who did Just Cause and Renegade Ops. I really enjoy that game, but at the same time, I also kind of feel like the developers didn't know where they wanted to go with that car-based combat. Like, it just kind of, I guess, pun intended, kind of like sputtered out of control. It kind of like died down, like maybe like halfway to like the 75% mark. I remember the final boss wasn't even like a car fight. You were on the ground, like shooting at a car. You weren't even like driving against it.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tim.
No, you go ahead.
I have nothing to say there.
Okay, fine. I was just going to say that the Mad Max is sort of an adventure game. You know, it's sort of it's like they featured the car so prominently that you only had to go a couple steps. If it was only about the car, then it could have held up. But clearly, it was sort of more about sort of the narrative of the world and our recollections of the Mad Max movies and stuff. And I think it gives us sort of like it inspires the possibility of a game like Mad Max that you never get out of the car, and that maybe it's like the structure's like Shadow of Mordor, but you just drive the car around forever. And I mean, I'd love that.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's an interesting question. I guess here's something for you guys and for chat or for people watching this recorded. Can you do a driving game like that and just have the person never leave the car? Like, do you think like people will accept that level of business that, you know, our driver just never leaves his car? Or even like something like Roundabout. Does anyone here remember Roundabout? Like the very wacky indie game.
That was pretty neat. Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, you know, I never left the car. I don't think I left the car in Twisted Metal, so for sure. Even if for some reason there was a button to get out of the car, I would have got back in right away. So, yeah, I definitely feel. Don't you feel like Tomo? I mean, you can totally.
Yeah, very much. And granted, the moment you let someone out of the car, you got to make that work.
Yeah, it's totally. It's your game, your character controller, like. It's just a whole bunch of other work that's not really necessary, needed, and probably won't carry over or help the game in any way.
Weird games, Battlezone and Renegade. Was it Red Alert or Command and Conquer?
Yeah, Command and Conquer.
Right, these very hybrid games. I think Battlezone held up a lot better, and there's a lot of probably conversations about car combat to have with that one. But they were, you know, Renegade was a humongous effort and was so difficult from a project development standpoint, and just tried to do so much. And I think there was a game that was in development for a long time called Tiberium, which was a everything kind of game with like vehicles and RTS and first person shooting and all this cool stuff. And
just
bringing that all together is impossible. And eventually, I think they spent a great deal of money, and the project got canceled.
Yeah, I think that was probably either developed around or after when Westwood was trying to do Earth and Beyond, which was kind of like their take on the MMO. And yeah,
it's definitely after that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they ever recovered from Earth and Beyond because again, like MMOs are just a massive investment to get off the ground.
Yeah.
Now I get to feel sad and old about Westwood closing. What was I about to say?
We'll have an episode about MMOs closing and be sad.
Yeah,
it'll be a whole long episode.
And to your point about kind of like the Grand Theft Auto form, about how hard it is, like in terms of on foot versus driving, that's another very interesting challenge to solve because for every kind of vehicle, every kind of movement you have in your game, you need to make sure that feels right. And like the Grand Theft Auto games, like to my mind, I did not play a Grand Theft Auto. I guess we're up to 5 or 6. I always forget which one we're at right now. But the latest one, I have not played that one. But I remember so many horror stories of trying to control your character, get in the car, and then get out of the car. It's a completely different control scheme of GTA 4.
Yeah, and again, like the vehicle, like I feel like they only 1 or 2 variables for the vehicles, not too much. They all kind of control very similar, and not that great. You know what I mean? And and yeah, there's just a lot of issues with, like, getting in the vehicle, getting out of the vehicle, the different the different control schemes, and so it's just it's a whole other game, man, when you have to do that. So
what was the mech game that came out? And you could get out of the mech.
Oh my gosh!
I think that we're talking early 2000s, maybe a little bit before that. This is like when the was it Blizzard or Bungie? They came out with the female character where you're like stealthing around.
Is that StarCraft Nova?
It might have been or StarCraft Ghost.
Yeah.
In that era, there was this mech game. Oh God, it's so hard to remember, but I think you could get in and out of it, and I think I remember liking that game a lot. But it was just a shooter. But I guess my only point is, if you're going to be changing scales like that, you have to sell the sort of story experience of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're not prepared to do that, then you got to be real careful about doing that.
Yeah. I was thinking about games like Blaster Master, which was also kind of car, but was more of an action platformer.
I was wondering if we're going to bring that up. I was thinking about Blaster Master time.
Oh man, that game. Love that game.
Love that game. Love that game. I still, every now and then, I have dreams of it. Just remember.
Well, there's room probably for the type of game where you can multiplayer your buddy into the turret. The time is now for that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh yeah,
someone has to make a good vehicle fighting game.
One of the ideas I was trying to put together a small group of people around was trying to make almost like a Power Ranger style game where everyone's controlling the individual arms or pieces of a Zord.
Oh wow, yeah, that would be pretty great.
Yeah,
there you go. That's already 3 or 4 game ideas today.
Although the version of this that goes wrong is that when the 5 people come together, they're controlling the whole thing.
Oh no,
kind of like it's co-op.
Oh yeah, it's co-op. Yeah,
and they're like,
just punch, just throw a fist.
And then it's 5v5 mech combat game. And they should just call it a mega jank.
There we go.
Yeah, mega jank.
Oh, I'm sorry, mecha jank.
Mecha jank.
Again, I hope someone's noting these $1 million ideas we're coming up with here.
Mega jank.
That would create a lot of Twitch comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be great. Mega jank.
One other game that I can think of in terms of combat with vehicles that I get to again date myself today, which I'm pretty sure no one here has ever played, was a Toy Commander. This was for the Dreamcast, way back. I only remember what year it came out.
Yeah.
This was kind of like Toy Story, but vehicle combat, and using the vehicles to solve puzzles and fight other things. Very interesting game.
Was this a game made by the same guys that made Halloween Quest and stuff? No, this is before that.
I think it's from No Cliche, I think was the studio that made it. And this was one of those games that was very interesting. You could switch between different vehicles based on the situation at hand. But it had that, again, as you're talking about, that very weird feel of, hey, you're driving a race car, you're going to drive her to a helicopter, now you're piloting a helicopter. Now you're going to go to a fire truck. Now you're driving a fire truck. And it's 3 different physics models and controls that you had to keep track of.
Yeah, the stuff that Battlefield kind of made more mainstream.
Mm.
Those early Battlefields, that was good stuff.
Yeah, the whole Battlefield, well, my alarm's going to be maybe hearing it in the distance there, but that was another interesting aspect. We're talking about the co-op side of things, having multiple people controlling an individual vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
I guess as a time check, we're about 55 minutes in. I know we have to probably get going the next 5 to 6 minutes.
Sure.
But I guess 2 last points I want to ask you guys about. One, what do you think about as you were talking earlier about the simulation side? What do you think about car or vehicle games where it's very, I can't think of the word I want to think, maybe janky or very cumbersome. There's a series that I cannot remember the name of it. Something sail, something Full Sail. It was kind of like you're piloting this like massive vehicle, and like you have to like go around in the vehicle like maneuvering different things. So it's like if you want to steer, you have to run over here and hit the steering buttons. But then you need to go down here, pick up fuel, run over here to the engines. Like, what do you think about like that kind of like vehicle, like when it's like so, again, like cumbersome, but that's like the point of it.
I mean, that's a very specific type of game. I believe it can work, but you have to get the theme right. It has to be the right amount of funny to kind of cover up some of the frustration. And then part of it is like getting to know this like giant thing that you're running around and controlling.
Yeah, you need some really good onboarding. It could work. Yeah, but just excellent onboarding for that type of game. Really niche.
Mm-hmm.
Lone Sales is what you're talking about, right?
Lone Sales.
Far
Lone Sales. They did a sequel, which I played like 20 minutes of, and I just got like really tired of that kind of movement. Because again, it's such a very niche style of control.
You can get the demo.
And then the other point that I want to like end on, like talking about like kind of the evolution. This is something that we were discussing earlier and before the recording. That a lot of indie developers have turned like car combat or car-based games into like puzzle titles, into like these very like interesting and very different design games. There's a You Suck at Parking. There's one that I play with my friend Thorn where like one person builds a track while the other person's driving a car, and you're trying to like work together in terms of figuring out how to get to different things. And that again is I think where we've seen kind of like how like the platform or other genres have kind of been adopted by indies, that a lot of indie developers have been trying to embrace like cars or vehicular based designs, but in much smaller and maybe less, I guess, like clunky or I guess less meticulous detail.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot like I mean, I think we're in the land of separate genre. It could have combat, but then it wouldn't be this kind of car combat genre we're talking about. But that's a really interesting space to be, because games with physics, if done right, are really engaging. They may often come off as kind of small. I guess you could add a lot of RPG progress into it somehow, but I'm thinking sort of like the aesthetic of Mini Metro and those kinds of games.
All right. So I guess here's the final question, then we'll do our around the table wrap up. To end on discussing the future, we've been kind of going in like different directions, but for both of you, and even for people watching this recorded, what do you envision could be a possible future for car-based combat or vehicular-based combat design?
Tomo?
Well, I mean, I think there's two answers to that, right? Like the easy answer is sort of in our indie spaces, that there's room for so much of these elements, and I think they're overlooked. There's room to bring these elements into games and make some really fun and creative new experiences for players. And you know how you're talking about like cars and puzzles? There's a game called Absolute Drift, by the way.
Yes, Absolute Drift.
And it's a fantastic sort of puzzle experience, and it just entirely is it's handled through the idea of sort of vehicular physics. And you could probably do you could tone down the physics and add like you trying to turn a turret or turn some weapon to target things, or maybe take pictures of things if you want to get weird, and then you could totally make a game out of that. And the game in sort of our indie spaces like that would sound interesting and attractive, I think, to our audiences. And then you could go any number of ways, like tons of different ways with that. But the other direction is like, so we want to get Twisted Metal back. We want to get people playing Twisted Metal, right? And I think someone has to figure out a way to overcome the sort of some of the free-to-play like hurdles, right? This long-term play experience, people coming back for more. They do it for Rocket League, or they'll do it for Monster Hunter, or what's the free-to-play game that's like Monster Hunter?
Dauntless, I think.
Dauntless,
Dauntless,
they'll do it for Dauntless, and I think maybe player counts for Dauntless might be dropping, but it was working for a while there. So you get that setup, which that setup is expensive and complicated and easy to mess up. But if you could do that, I think car combat is a great genre to support that kind of play experience. And so if someone could just get all the pieces together, I think that there's, we could have millions of new users that fight each other in vehicles like I do sometimes in World of Tanks, just all the time.
Yeah, I think clearly there is the need and the want for it. I mean, you can tell, like, if we could get something along the lines of like how Rocket League is, right? How it's set up, excellent physics, excellent net code, something like that, but Twisted Metal instead, and maybe not so live servicey, maybe more like oriented toward like how fighting games are supported, where you don't really need new content. It's just the same thing over and over again, because that's it, right? Just a few characters, a few vehicles, and then that's it, right? And I think that there is a space like that, like, because people love Rocket League, right? It's vehicular, and a part of it is the physics, a part of it is vehicular, and that's what car combat does have, right? You can do physics, the great online netcode, and then just Twisted Metal Rocket League. I think that's really what would be the next feature for it right there.
Yeah, and I know someone is currently working on, because I posted this like a few months ago, that there is a F-Zero Kickstarter inspired game that did succeed.
Yes.
And yeah, I know someone there. I'm pretty sure there's a there's a Wipeout or somewhat style like flying base game that was part of one of the I think the Haunted PlayStation 1 demo disc that I played. So there's definitely people like experimenting with that. But it is, again, like as we've said, like it's harder than I think you may think from the outside in order to design a really good example of this. Because if you try to make something and say, hey, this is just gonna be like 1992 Mario Kart, well, a lot of people who didn't grow up playing that, they're just gonna be like, oh my God, this handles so horribly. I mean, and again, if you're just trying to compete against Mario Kart, well, Mario Kart is still being done, and I think they're still supporting like the latest Mario Kart. Like Nintendo's been like really going heavy on that one.
Yeah, they sure have. Yeah, and then and again, just one of the sad tenets about this genre is just it's so difficult to develop. You really need money. You really need a big team to do this right. You can get by with an indie team, but vehicles, just the vehicle by themselves, really hard to code, require a lot of very talented people. You know what I mean? So that's just one of the drawbacks about it. You know what I mean? I'd probably say it's easier throw together an FPS, way easier than to try and make you could have an FPS that would control better, for example, than a vehicle game if you're going, right, Tomo?
Well, yeah, because there's no momentum, right? That's do you remember when what was it called? Killzone 2 first shipped?
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, they felt like they wanted you to, if you were turning the camera, that when you stopped giving inputs, that they wanted to ease to a stop. Oh. And it felt like your body was like a gigantic boat.
Yeah.
And it was, the response was so negative, they had to fix it right away. By the way, Killzone 2 became a fantastic, I think I'm talking about Killzone 3. Killzone 3 became a fantastic game once they fixed all those issues. But like, that stuff it's not easy to make that stuff feel good. No. It's hard. Like you can't really control where you go, right? Because you have momentum and a limitation to how you can steer. It's tough stuff.
And that's something at top I love to discuss on Roundtable about getting that movement for some of these games, because that is incredibly difficult. I have so many horror stories of it, indie platformers. And just jumping in indie games, and I can
just a jump. I actually played Peak Tower off your recommendation the other day, so I couldn't get past some parts of the tutorial, so I just gave up.
Oh yeah, that's another topic we can rave about, but we are knocking right on time.
Yeah.
So for the
one of the next topics for sure then should be like movement in and the experience of movement in games. I think that'd be a great one.
Oh yes.
We got to do AI, Tomo, before it's too late.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll every other talk will be an AI talk soon enough, right?
Soon enough, right?
And every game will be an RPG at some point too. We'll just combine the two, and we're done. That's all the discussions we need. But,
RPG car combat.
Yep. But for people watching us record it, again, what do you think is the future, or is there a future for car-based combat? Let us know in the comments down below. But, gentlemen, as always, it has been a pleasure hanging out with you this fine evening. I'll once again give you guys a chance to go around, plug what you're doing, anything like that. So, we'll go in reverse order this time. So, Tomo, you are starting.
I have a game on early access on Steam called Epic Tavern, and it's all about fantasy adventure and emergent storytelling. And you can find, and we still stream development a couple times a week at twitch.tv/Epic Tavern. And you can visit our Discord channel at discord.gg/Epic Tavern as well.
All right. Over to Josh.
All right, and all my links should be down below. Josh from Casual Game Studio, currently working on Samurai Pig wish list. Let's see what else. Catch me on also on Saturday for Keys to Game Wisdom, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm. And for me, again, if you're here, do liking, subscribing, bell ringing, all that. Check out our Discord and Patreon. If you have suggestions for future shows and topics, let us know. And other than that, we will try and get together again for another discussion real soon. So, everyone, once again, thank you for tuning in, and thank you to Josh and Tomo for our discussion. Everyone, have a great night, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.